Jon Snow awoke to the slow, steady beat of wings in the distance, echoing across the jagged heights of Dragonstone. Gray light spilled into his chamber, and for a moment he could not recall where he was. Then it all rushed back, the splendor of the ancient fortress rising from the sea, the flickering torches casting shadows along corridors carved from black stone, and above all else, the presence of dragons. Their roars haunted the nights, their shadows haunted his dreams. And he knew beyond all doubt that something had changed within him, that he could sense them, feel them in his blood, as though every breath he took was tethered to the might of scaled wings. He rose from the narrow bed, pulling a rough-spun shirt over his scarred torso. Ghost lay curled at the foot of the bed, lifting his head to watch him dress. The direwolf's red eyes glimmered in the gloom, and he let out a low whine that echoed with concern. Jon touched Ghost's thick fur. The wolf remained warm and reassuring beneath his fingers, but Jon's mind was elsewhere. He recalled the moment on the beach, the swirl of sea mist around them when he had reached out to Daenerys's largest dragon, Drogon, and felt no fear. In turn, Drogon had watched him with an almost curious intelligence in those great molten eyes. Jon had brushed a hand along the beast's flank. He had expected to be seared by that black armor of scales, but instead it felt alive, pulsing with the heat and heartbeat of a creature that was part myth, part muscle, part unstoppable force. Many claimed that only Daenerys Targaryen, Stormborn, mother of dragons, could tame such monsters of fire and fury. But somehow Drogon had permitted Jon's touch. That alone stirred murmurs among the Queen's closest advisors. Tyrion had grown thoughtful, eyes flicking between Daenerys and Jon, uncertain what to make of it. Missandei had smiled, glancing at her queen, while the Dothraki warriors pressed hands to curved blades, half convinced Jon Snow was some strange sorcerer from the north. But Daenerys had only narrowed her eyes, observing, storing the moment in her mind. He could almost see her shaping new strategies from that revelation as she shaped the wider Game of Thrones. Then, late in the night, a heavy silence had fallen over Dragonstone. Jon had tried to rest, unsettled by what he had done. He had woken to the distant roars of Regal and Viserion, the other two dragons. It was as though they had sensed his contact with Drogon. In that moment, half dreaming, Jon thought he had heard a whisper in his mind, a presence from the dragons, intangible but real. He felt them calling to him, yet he could not put it into words. Now, morning drifted across the island in wisps of fog. Jon ran a hand through his dark hair and strapped on the sword belt that held Longclaw. There was work to be done, alliances to be maintained. He had come to Dragonstone to seek an alliance against the true threat to the north. The White Walkers who stirred beyond the wall. Yet that was no longer his only concern. There was something else lurking within him, a riddle he could neither name nor ignore. He thought of Samwell Tarly's old bookish grin and Sam's insistence that knowledge was a shield. Perhaps, Jon thought, knowledge would explain the impossible feelings that knotted his chest. He stepped into the corridor, with Ghost padding quietly at his side. The fortress felt hushed in this early hour. Each echo of a footstep vanished into the depths of the black stone walls. Outside, the sea crashed against sheer cliffs that seemed older than time. He inhaled the salty air, and with each breath, that faint presence in the back of his mind pulsed. An ache or a beckoning? He was not sure which. He descended a winding staircase that opened onto a courtyard with high, spiked walls. The morning gloom was lifting and gulls keened overhead. On the far side of the courtyard stood Daenerys Targaryen. She wore a dark cloak pinned at her shoulder with a silver three-headed dragon brooch. Her platinum hair was braided and fell down her back, and a thoughtful expression lit her violet eyes. She was gazing out across the sea, arms folded. When Jon entered, she turned with an expectant air, as though something told her he would arrive. "Jon Snow," she said softly, with a nod that implied respect as well as caution. "You're up early." "I find it difficult to sleep on Dragonstone," he admitted, glancing to the sky. "It seems the dragons do not rest much either." At that, she permitted herself a small smile. "They never have, not truly. Since they hatched, they've been restless. In truth, I share that restlessness. We can sleep when the war is won." Jon's posture grew tense. War, yes, there were many wars, each with its own shape and horror. And, ironically, the war that mattered most to him was the one few in the South truly believed in. He wondered if he might again try to explain the White Walkers or if it was a fool's errand. But Daenerys surprised him by turning her gaze abruptly to the sky. High above, a dark shape circled. Drogon. The beating of his enormous wings drifted through the air, stirring winds that whipped Daenerys's cloak and Jon's hair. Beside Drogon flew Regal and Viserion, swirling in a lazy spiral around each other. In the gray morning light, their scales glistened, green for Regal, cream and gold for Viserion, and black for Drogon. Daenerys looked back to Jon, her eyes narrow. "The dragons seem curious about you," she said. "All three of them." Jon felt the stirring in his blood. The presence, the call. He masked the unease. "They sense something, perhaps? I don't know what it is." She took a step closer. "You are a Targaryen," she murmured so quietly that he wondered if he had heard her correctly or if the words were meant for her alone. But she said it again, more firmly. "You have the blood of the dragon in your veins, Jon Snow." He tensed. He remembered Sam's revelation, how Ned Stark was not his father, but Rhaegar Targaryen was. The truth that roiled like thunder in his mind. He had not wanted to believe it. He had not wanted to bring it into the open, as though speaking it aloud would make him traitor to the man who raised him. But he had told Daenerys, or rather, he had confessed the possibility that they were related, that he might bear the Targaryen blood. It had shocked her at first, threatened her sense of identity. And then, instead of anger, something like wonder had blossomed. She was no longer the last Targaryen, and that fact mattered for their cause, for the looming war, and perhaps, deep down, for her loneliness in the world. "There is power in our blood," she continued. "A power as old as Valyria. And that is why Drogon allowed you to touch him." Jon's hands clenched at his sides. What if that's not all he allows? The question hung there, raw and charged. She glanced at him, then back to the swirling dragons overhead who were descending in a slow circle toward a distant cliff. The largest of them let out a roar that echoed over the sea. "Come with me," she said. She strode off across the courtyard, her boots echoing. Jon followed. Ghost padded behind them, the wolf uneasy, muzzle lifted, sniffing the air. Daenerys led Jon through corridors of black obsidian walls, finally emerging onto a terrace that overlooked a stretch of flat rock. Beyond that, the sea crashed with furious white foam. The dragons were landing one by one. First Drogon, who folded his monstrous wings with a leathery rattle, then Regal, the green beast, and last Viserion. The three animals seemed restless, snapping at each other's tails, then letting out blasts of sizzling breath that stank of sulfur. They were hungry, perhaps, or excited. "Wait here," Daenerys commanded. She moved forward, so close to Drogon's huge form that Jon tensed, fearing a savage bite. But the black-scaled dragon recognized his mother and lowered his head for her to touch. She stroked between two formidable horns. Then she spoke to Regal and Viserion in a soft voice, some crooning sound that Jon had never heard come from her before. It was the voice of a mother to her children, at once gentle and commanding. The dragons paused, settling into watchfulness. Daenerys beckoned Jon closer, inviting him toward the swirling reek of sulfur and the scorching heat that emanated from their scales. Jon's heart hammered. He approached, unsure whether he was stepping calmly or staggering from the weight of fear and awe. Drogon's pupils narrowed when Jon drew close. The black dragon's head snaked forward, jaws parted slightly to taste Jon's scent on the wind. Jon steeled himself, refusing to back away. He sensed, rather than saw, a wave of heat shimmering in the air. With every footstep, the presence in his blood roared louder, as though the dragons and he shared one heartbeat. Finally, he stood near the ridged flank of Drogon's shoulder, so close he could have touched it. He remembered the sensation of the scales' warmth beneath his palm. A tremor of that memory traced through him. Yet his gaze was caught by the other two dragons, Regal and Viserion, who stared at him as though seeing a ghost. Daenerys took another step back, giving him space, as though to test if he could manage this alone. Nostrils flared, the green one, Regal, leaned forward. His name had come from Rhaegar Targaryen, Jon's father, though Jon barely grasped how that complicated tapestry of lineage had woven itself together. He offered his palm, and Regal extended his massive snout, letting out a low rumble that vibrated through Jon's bones. Then came an indescribable moment of contact. Regal's snout touched Jon's outstretched hand. The scales were warm, smoother than he had imagined, pulsing with the steady thrum of the dragon's heartbeat. A chord within Jon's very soul seemed to resonate, and he saw, in some flickering swirl behind his eyes, a flash of ancient memory, something like Valyrian steel forging, or the echo of Aegon the Conqueror's arrival in Westeros, or Rhaegar at the Trident. It was as though the dragon carried within him the ghosts of 1,000 Targaryens who had come before. When he withdrew his hand, Regal turned his great head to regard him curiously, letting out a soft growl. Viserion crept closer, gold and cream scales shimmering in the dull morning light. He wanted his turn, it seemed. Jon moved slowly, mindful that in any moment he could be torn to pieces by jaws big enough to snap a horse's spine. Yet Viserion settled, tucking his wings close to his flank, and lowered his head so Jon could brush his palm along the beast's long neck. Again, that strange swirl of half-remembered powers whirled in Jon's mind. He drew a ragged breath, scarcely believing that all three dragons were letting him near. Drogon let out a snort, then lowered himself further as if acknowledging a bond already formed. Daenerys watched all of this intently, her face unreadable. The wind whipped her white hair around her face, but she did not blink as she watched Jon put his hands on each dragon in turn. Even Ghost stayed near, only occasionally letting out a quiet whine, but not fleeing. Finally, Daenerys nodded once, satisfied. "They have accepted you," she whispered. "All of them." The words sent a ripple of emotion through Jon. He was reminded of old stories from the north about bond brothers, about wargs who slipped their souls into direwolves, and about the Targaryen gift for dragon riding. It felt impossible, yet there he stood, bones thrumming with the vitality of 3 living creatures that seemed to claim him as their own. Daenerys moved closer to him. The smell of salt air and ash clung to her cloak. She peered up at Drogon's huge, horned head and placed a hand gently on Jon's shoulder. "I have never seen such a thing," she admitted quietly. "They are my children, and I have raised them since they were eggs. They have never shown such open curiosity to anyone but me." Jon answered with a low voice, "Perhaps it's because of our blood." Her expression flickered at that, sadness, hope, confusion. "Yes, perhaps." Then she seemed to gather herself, recalling the world beyond this extraordinary moment. The war for the Iron Throne rages. And beyond that, the threat you speak of in the north. If you can truly bond with them, if they will heed your commands, that changes everything. He hesitated, not wanting to reduce these majestic creatures to mere weapons in a war. And yet, war was upon them, and men would turn all they could muster into weapons. He inclined his head. "Then let it be so. We need to unite, or the whole world will burn." She nodded, solemn. And together they turned to face the sea, the dragons shifting around them. For one long moment, both Targaryens stood in silence, knowing their destiny was forging itself upon a dark anvil that very instant. That afternoon, the tide ebbed and the skies cleared, revealing a bright sun that glinted off the ocean. Tyrion Lannister, hands clasped behind his back, approached Jon near the fortress ramparts. The dwarf's footsteps were careful on the uneven surface. He had the look of a man who had once thought he understood the shape of the game, only to find the board upended. "Lord Snow," Tyrion said, inclining his head, "or should I say, Prince Targaryen?" His lips curved into a dry smile, acknowledging the swirling rumors. "What a world we live in." "I'd say Jon Snow suits me just fine," Jon replied. He found Tyrion's presence oddly comforting, a voice of reason. "Titles have never been much comfort to me. And yet, sometimes they're like suits of armor, giving men the chance to play bigger than themselves," Tyrion remarked. He turned, leaning on a low stone parapet that overlooked the sea, waves smashing below. "The Queen told me what happened this morning with the dragons." "All 3, Jon? I knew you were special, but I didn't guess you'd be that special." Jon exhaled. "I wish I could explain it. I wish it was as simple as riding a horse or swinging a sword. But it's not. There's something deeper. I can feel them in my mind." Tyrion's eyes were sharp. "Then we found a new piece on the board. A dragon rider is worth 1,000 knights, and 3 dragons might be worth entire armies." He paused. "I only hope you are prepared. Many lords, many knights, many queens in waiting, they'll all want your loyalty. Some may call you abomination. Others may name you rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Dragons do not solve the complexities of men, they only add to them." Jon recalled with bitterness how the northern lords had resisted bending the knee to anyone but a Stark. Then he remembered Sam's words that Jon was not truly a Stark, but he was something else, something that might hold the fate of Westeros in the balance. He sighed. "I only want to defeat the White Walkers to save the living. The Iron Throne, the politics, the backstabbing, none of it matters if we fail against the dead." Tyrion's lips pressed together. "That is true. But you may find you cannot escape the game, no matter how you try. Not if you ride 3 dragons." He flicked his gaze to the bright sky, where dark shapes lazily circled once more. Then he patted Jon on the shoulder and walked away, leaving Jon alone with his thoughts. By evening, Daenerys had proposed a test flight. The notion struck Jon with both excitement and dread. He had never flown on Dragonback before, had scarcely even dared to imagine it. But Daenerys insisted, with a determined set to her jaw, if the dragons had welcomed Jon, let him learn to harness that bond. Let him understand what it meant to be Targaryen in both name and practice. So, as dusk approached, they walked to a wide plateau where Drogon crouched, limbs coiled like a huge cat ready to spring. Regal and Viserion perched on nearby rocks, observing with luminous eyes. A stable boy might watch a man mounting a new stallion, but these were no mere horses. Jon's heart pounded. Daenerys had already saddled Drogon with a harness of thick leather straps. She insisted it provided some measure of security for the rider, though she often rode him bareback with fearless grace. Jon passed a hand along Drogon's flank. The black dragon shifted and let out a low rumble. He seemed impatient. Daenerys guided Jon to the harness. "Watch," she said softly, and with practiced motions she showed him how to hoist himself up, place his feet in the stirrup-like loops, and cling to the strap that anchored around Drogon's neck. Drogon, for his part, tolerated this with the mild impatience of a horse who trusts its rider but is eager to gallop. Jon's muscles tensed as he climbed. He felt each movement of the dragon's coiled muscles under his thighs. The heat radiating from Drogon's body was immense, nearly scalding. Wind tugged at Jon's cloak, and Ghost watched anxiously from a distance, pacing. Daenerys, at the front of Drogon's harness, glanced back, eyes bright with excitement. Her silver braids shone in the fading sunlight. "Hold tight," she commanded. She made a soft clicking sound. Drogon tensed, and a moment later he leapt into the air. The shock of it nearly tore Jon loose. His stomach lurched, the plateau falling away below them as Drogon's wings beat with thunderous pulses. A roar tore from the dragon's throat. Jon clamped his hands on the leather straps, head dizzy with altitude. The wind whipped at him, stinging his cheeks. He had ridden horses across the snowy wastes beyond the wall, but this was an entirely different realm. A swirl of clouds and wind, the horizon bending away in every direction. The sea glimmering like molten steel far below. The sensation of flight took his breath. Daenerys glanced back at him, a grin on her face. "Relax," she called over the wind. "Find the rhythm." Jon tried. It helped that he felt some intangible link with Drogon. He sensed the beast's enormous heartbeat, the tension and flex of muscle, the movement of those colossal wings that kept them aloft. Gradually, he dared to loosen his white-knuckled grip, trusting he would not tumble off. His heart hammered with exhilaration. Up here, the petty squabbles of men seemed smaller, overshadowed by the vastness of sky and sea. The two other dragons soared alongside, screeching in apparent delight at having their brother in the air with them. And beneath the gathering twilight, Jon Snow soared with the Queen of Dragons, no longer quite the same man he had been on the ground. They circled Dragonstone once, then twice, drifting on thermals. The setting sun bled orange across the water. In that moment, Jon understood how Aegon the Conqueror might have felt as he surveyed Westeros from Dragonback. Invincible, unstoppable, like a living god. But it also made him uneasy. Such power in mortal hands could corrupt. He had seen men changed by a fraction of this. He vowed to himself that, if he must wield it, he would do so only for the good of the realm, never for glory. Eventually, Drogon flapped into a glide and eased back toward the plateau. The dragon landed in a flurry of displaced air, scattering small stones and dust. Jon swung down carefully. His legs trembled. His arms ached from clinging so fiercely. Daenerys dismounted gracefully, as though it were second nature to her. She turned to face Jon, eyes alight. "How did it feel?" she asked. Jon let out a shaky laugh. "Like nothing I've ever known. Like being both terrified and thrilled in the same moment." She nodded, stepping closer, so near he could see the small scars on her cheek from the day the dragons were born in Khal Drogo's funeral pyre. "You did well," she said. "You looked steady." He raised an eyebrow. "I felt anything but steady. I've never been so close to 80 or so alive." They stared at each other for a moment. The tension of everything unsaid hovered between them. Truths about lineage and alliances and something more personal. But then she tore her gaze away. "Tomorrow we can try with Regal," she said, and there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "I'd like to see how they all respond when you're in the air." Jon could only nod, reeling from the magnitude of this new path. He felt Ghost press his muzzle against his hand, and was grateful for his loyal direwolf's grounding presence. As the last sliver of sun vanished over the horizon, Jon gazed at the three dragons, Drogon, Regal, Viserion, who watched him with unsettling curiosity. He had bonded with them in ways he did not fully grasp, and he sensed that bond was only growing stronger. A subtle dread and wonder warred in his heart. If men saw him in the sky riding a dragon as Daenerys Targaryen did, what would they say? And would it matter when the true war in the north arrived? In the following weeks, the daily routine at Dragonstone shifted around these new flights. By Daenerys' decree, Jon was to train with the dragons under her supervision, learning to mount and ride each one. The first attempts were clumsy. Drogon was easy enough, since he had already accepted Jon's presence on his back. But Regal and Viserion required a different balance, different harness fittings. Jon found himself thrown once when Regal lurched unexpectedly. He hit the ground hard, bruising his side, though thankfully he avoided major injuries. He got up, winded, rubbed the soreness from his ribs, and tried again. That determination endeared him to some of Daenerys's blood riders, who watched from a distance, occasionally shouting advice or cheers. He realized that each dragon had a distinct temperament. Drogon was proud, almost arrogant, easily offended if mishandled. Regal was quick and agile in the air, responding eagerly to subtle shifts in weight, but he had a certain wariness that demanded calm from his rider. Viserion was gentler, though prone to sudden bursts of aggression when hungry, requiring vigilance. As Jon adapted to each, his confidence grew, and he found that intangible link thrumming more strongly in his mind. Sometimes, late at night, he would hear the faintest echo of the dragons' voices in his dreams. Roars and snarls mingled with something almost like words, though he could never quite remember them upon waking. While Jon trained, Daenerys busied herself with the affairs of war. Messages from her allies trickled in, updates from Yara Greyjoy's fleet, from the Unsullied's position near Casterly Rock, from Dorne. Tyrion, Missandei, and Varys worked tirelessly to coordinate the next move against Cersei Lannister, who still held King's Landing in an iron grip. Meanwhile, tension mounted between the Queen's forces and those of the North, as word spread of Jon's dragon riding, and the rumors of his Targaryen blood began to seep into the camps of both sides. Some Northerners muttered that their king in the North had betrayed them, letting Targaryen magic into his bones. But others pointed out that if Jon's ancestry made him a dragon rider, perhaps it was their best hope against the undead. Jon tried not to let these concerns distract him. He had come too far and learned too many harsh lessons about leadership to let whispers unsettle him. Still, at night, he sometimes lay awake, recalling the sense of belonging he had once felt at Winterfell. Now he was caught between worlds, Stark, Targaryen, the living, the dead. Amid all these developments, one evening Daenerys approached Jon in the yard where the dragons liked to lounge on warm stones. The night sky glittered with stars, and braziers cast dancing shadows against the stone walls. She wore a cloak over a thin gown, and her expression was grave. Tyrion and Varys stood behind her, similarly solemn. "We've had word," Daenerys said, "that the Night King marches south. Your friend Bran Stark. He sent word from Winterfell. The White Walkers are moving." Jon felt his pulse spike. "Moving south? How far?" "Far enough that we can no longer delay," Daenerys replied, voice tight. "Winterfell is rallying. They beg for aid, from me, from anyone who will come." "You were right, Jon. We cannot ignore the dead." Jon glanced at the dragons, who seemed restless, as though sensing the tension in the air. "Then we must move north as soon as we can," he said. "All the forces we can muster, all the dragons. This is the war that matters." Tyrion's face was pale. "We will lose ground here in the south, open ourselves to Cersei's counterattack if we march north. But the Queen believes, as do I, that if the White Walkers are not stopped, none of it matters." Daenerys folded her arms. "My advisors counsel caution, but I've had enough caution. Time is not our ally, winter is. My dragons will fly north with me, and you, Jon Snow, you will ride beside me. We will show the living that fire stands against the dead. Once and for all." Jon could not deny a rush of gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. He looked at the three dragons, who were like living storms in the darkness. "Then let's see if we can bring fire and blood against the Night King." It took several days to prepare. Ships were loaded, men gathered, alliances negotiated. Daenerys left a garrison on Dragonstone, but the bulk of her forces, Dothraki, Unsullied, and her loyal followers, would sail for White Harbor, then proceed to Winterfell. Tyrion fretted over supply lines, Varys worried about spies, but the plan was set. The dragons, of course, would not be contained to ships. They would fly overhead, occasionally soaring far ahead to scout. People whispered in awe to see 2 Targaryens astride dragons, leading a third riderless beast who followed at will. The realm had not seen such a sight in centuries. Jon took the lead on Regal, the green dragon whose name was so painfully tied to his father, Rhaegar Targaryen. It felt oddly right, though it also stirred unease. Daenerys remained on Drogon, her greatest child, and Viserion usually followed them, sometimes letting Daenerys guide him through a few sharp whistle commands. The bond between all 3 dragons and Jon was undeniable, though each one had certain preferences. At times, Regal would glide close to Drogon, the 2 beasts seeming to share some unspoken conversation, while Viserion circled at a distance. Jon found he could direct Regal with slight shifts in weight or taps to the harness. If he focused, he could calm the dragon's agitation when storms threatened. It was an eerie power, but it allowed them to make good time across the roiling seas. When they finally reached the north, the change in climate was stark. Winter had laid its grip upon the land. The snow seemed endless, blanketing fields and forests. The warships anchored near White Harbor, sending men and supplies ashore. Daenerys led her Dothraki across the frosty roads, though many grumbled at the cold. The Unsullied marched in silent discipline, their breath misting the air. And above them soared 3 dragons, roaring their challenge at the endless gray skies. Word traveled quickly, the Dragon Queen had come north. Some onlookers cheered, others cringed in fear. But none could deny that she had come, not for conquest, but to save them from the undead. It was near dusk when Jon and Daenerys finally approached Winterfell itself. They landed in the fields just outside the walls, the snow swirling around them in pale drifts. The old stronghold rose against the white sky, its towers crowned with ice. Jon felt a pang of homesickness mixed with a new awareness that he was returning changed in ways he could never have foreseen. He was no longer just the bastard of Winterfell. He had become something else entirely. The gates opened, revealing faces etched with shock and uncertainty. Sansa Stark stood at the forefront, draped in furs. Her red hair spilled down her shoulders, and her eyes flicked from Jon to Daenerys to the dragons behind them. Arya, silent and watchful, lingered beside her, a hand resting on a sheathed dagger. Bran Stark sat in a wheeled chair, pushed by a servant, and his gaze was distant as though he stared into a realm beyond mortal sight. Many northern lords gathered behind them, their breath steaming in the cold. No one spoke at first. The sight of 3 dragons in the north was a vision out of legend or perhaps nightmare. Jon dismounted, boots crunching on snow. He felt that old swirl of emotion at seeing Winterfell's courtyard. "Sansa," he said softly. "Arya." "Bran." Sansa's eyes shone with relief, though her posture remained guarded. "Jon," she breathed. "You came back." She flicked her gaze to Daenerys. "And you brought quite an army." Arya managed a small, wry grin. "You certainly know how to make an entrance." Daenerys inclined her head. "I have come to fight beside you," she said. "The threat to the north is a threat to all of us." Sansa measured the Targaryen queen for a moment, then exhaled. "I hope your dragons do not mind the cold," she said by way of an uneasy welcome. "They'll endure," Daenerys replied, though her tone was not unkind. She glanced at Jon, waiting for him to speak. Jon stepped forward, resting a hand lightly on Sansa's arm. "We can't waste time," he said, voice tight. "The White Walkers are coming if they aren't already here." Bran finally spoke, his voice carrying that hollow wisdom that always unsettled Jon. "The Night King moves swiftly," he said in a calm monotone. "His army is not far behind him." Silence fell. Then Sansa squared her shoulders. "Then let's get inside. We'll share what news we have. The north stands ready as best we can." With that, the gates were opened and the dragons let out thunderous roars that echoed across the snowy plains. Many in Winterfell flinched, but Jon raised a hand in a gentle gesture and Regal settled, folding his wings. The small display was not lost on the northerners. They exchanged wary glances, recognition passing among them that Jon truly had some hold over these creatures. Not just Daenerys, but Jon Snow as well. They reconvened in Winterfell's great hall. Fires crackled, casting flickering light on the rough-hewn walls. Benches were filled with lords and knights from across the north. Daenerys' advisors Tyrion, Missandei, and Grey Worm took their seats behind the queen. The Stark siblings occupied the dais, with Jon standing beside Daenerys, bridging 2 worlds. He noticed the stares, felt the tension in the air, and cleared his throat to speak. "We have little time," he began, voice echoing off the hall's stone walls. "We must unite our forces if we hope to stand against the army of the dead. The Night King will not stop until every living soul is under his thrall. Your titles, your feuds, none of that matters now." He paused, searching the room. "We fight or we die." A hush followed. Then Lyanna Mormont's fierce voice piped up from among the northern lords. "And will the dragons fight with us too?" Daenerys answered, "Yes. My children will burn any white that comes near these walls. We will fight together." The gathered lords exchanged looks. Some nodded, heartened by the promise of draconic might. Others seemed wary, as though the notion of Targaryen dragons in the north conjured old nightmares. But the mood was grim. No one wanted to quarrel with an ally that promised hope against the undead. Sansa stood. "The north is prepared as best we can be. We have stockpiled food and supplies. But with winter's fury, it won't last forever. We must pray the battle is decided quickly." Tyrion cleared his throat. "Then we must discuss defenses. The Unsullied are skilled at holding lines. The Dothraki are fearsome in open battle, though less suited for protracted defense within walls. And we have dragons." His lips quirked faintly. "That changes the nature of the conflict. The Night King may have never faced such a foe." Arya spoke softly. "We can use the walls of Winterfell to funnel them, but they're too many. We'll need to draw them in, perhaps plan a strike at the Night King himself." Her eyes were cold as steel, as though she had already pictured the kill. Bran's voice drifted like a specter. "The Night King will come for me. He knows I am the Three-Eyed Raven, and the Three-Eyed Raven is a threat to him. Perhaps we can use that." Jon felt a chill that had little to do with the freezing weather. "You want to lure him?" Bran nodded, expression vacant. "He will find me no matter where I hide. Better to set a trap." There was a murmur of unease. Daenerys folded her arms, glancing at Jon. Then she raised her head. "We will do whatever must be done," she said. "But know this, my dragons and I will fight with all our strength. We stand together or we fall." The lords exchanged resolved looks. Plans were made, positions assigned. Grey Worm would station the Unsullied at the walls, with the Dothraki prepared to charge at the first sign of the undead. The northern forces would hold the inner keep. Archers would line the battlements, obsidian-tipped arrows at the ready. Daenerys and Jon would remain mounted on Drogon and Regal, while Viserion circled overhead without a rider, responding to commands as best they could manage. And if that failed, well, they had little else to rely upon but steel, fire, and the determination of a desperate realm. The next day dawned under leaden skies. Snow drifted lazily. In the courtyard, men trained, forging last-minute bonds with the foreign soldiers. Women and children were ushered into the crypts beneath Winterfell for safety, though many anxious faces peered up from behind the gates, half wanting to watch the fabled dragons. Jon walked along the ramparts, greeting the men who had followed him from the north, exchanging nods and quiet words of encouragement. He encountered Theon Greyjoy, who had come to fight for the Starks, seeking some measure of redemption. They exchanged uneasy apologies for old betrayals. There was no time for deeper conversation. The war stood at their doorstep. Gendry hammered away in the forges, shaping dragonglass weapons with grim determination. Tormund Giantsbane showed up near midday, battered and half frostbitten from outrunning the whites near the last hearth. With him came a handful of wildlings, eyes wide at the sight of dragons perched on Winterfell's towers. By the afternoon, a hush fell. Scouts reported shapes in the distance, vague shadows across the white plains, shambling forward in an endless tide. The whites had come. The horns blew. Soldiers scrambled to positions. The gates clanged shut. Daenerys and Jon rushed to the courtyard, where Drogon and Regal stirred restlessly, plumes of hot breath curling in the cold air. Viserion circled overhead, letting out an eerie cry. Once again, Jon mounted Regal. Daenerys took Drogon. This time there was no fear in Jon's movements, no trembling. He had done this many times now. The harness felt like an extension of his body, the dragon's heartbeat aligning with his own. Daenerys spared him a quick, fierce glance, and they exchanged a nod. Then the gates parted just enough for the two dragons to rush forward, taking flight in clouds of blowing snow, climbing high over Winterfell's walls. From the vantage of the sky, Jon saw them, thousands upon thousands of undead, a bristling sea of rotted flesh and icy eyes, flowing across the snowy plain like a single organism. At the center, the White Walkers rode skeletal horses, their pale blades gleaming with cold magic. And behind them, towering in the swirling snow, drifted the presence Jon most dreaded. The Night King, astride a monstrous undead creature. A zombified giant or some hideous abomination. It was difficult to see clearly through the storm that seemed to follow him. But Jon knew he was there, a figure of living ice that had haunted his nightmares. He recalled Hard Home, the carnage, the dead rising with a single gesture. The memory chilled his blood. Now, Daenerys shouted, and Drogon Dove, unleashing a torrent of dragonfire upon the front lines of the Whites. A swath of flame cut through them, turning 100 undead to ash in moments. But more kept coming, as countless as grains of sand. Regal let out a roar, and Jon guided him into a dive, feeling his heart hammer with adrenaline. Fire burst from Regal's jaws, scorching another swath of the undead horde. The ground below lit up with orange and red, Whites collapsing in blackened heaps. The stench of burning flesh rose to the sky. Still, they did not stop. The Unsullied braced shields along the battlements, thrusting spears at any White that drew close. The Dothraki thundered forward in a wave, curved blades shining with dragonglass edges. They cleaved into the undead lines, howling war cries. But even as they cut down Whites, more swarmed around them. Snow churned red with blood and black with rot. The living fought desperately, hearts pounding, as the monstrous tide pressed in. Jon circled overhead, unleashing more fire. His eyes searched for the Night King. That was their best chance. If the Night King fell, the magic animating his army might shatter. He saw a flash of movement, an icy lance hurled from below. He jerked Regal aside, the spear missing by mere feet. That spear would have impaled Regal's heart had it struck home. Fear jolted through Jon. The White Walkers were targeting them, seeking to bring the dragons down just as the Night King had once brought down Viserion beyond the wall. In that moment, Viserion roared overhead, blasting a line of Whites with swirling flame. Jon felt a pang of relief. Viserion was still alive, still fighting. Then a flash of movement caught his eye as some great, undead giant swinging a massive club, smashing a handful of men off the ramparts. Regal Dove flame spraying. The giant howled and went up in flames, thrashing about. But the side of Winterfell's wall crumbled under the onslaught, revealing a gap where Whites could spill inside. Below, Jon glimpsed Sansa guiding civilians to retreat deeper into the castle. Arya darted among the shadows, slaying Whites with lethal precision. And Bran was nowhere to be seen, likely in the Godwood as planned, waiting to lure the Night King. That was where Jon needed to be. He pressed his knees into Regal's flanks. "Fly me to the Godwood," he shouted. He could feel the dragon respond to his urgency, banking hard. Then Daenerys soared by, Drogon setting ablaze a cluster of Whites near the main gate, giving the defenders a moment's respite. She looked at Jon, her expression fierce. He gestured toward the Godwood, hoping she understood the plan. She nodded once and peeled away, covering his flank with Drogon's fire. The wind screamed past Jon's ears as Regal sped across the courtyard. Whites clambered up the walls, trying to reach them. With a savage roar, Regal unleashed another stream of flame, scorching a path. Jon saw a swirl of movement below, the White Walkers crossing the courtyard, heading for the heart of Winterfell. The heart where Bran waited. A shrieking cold wind cut across the night. Snow whipped in a sudden blizzard like the fury of the storm itself had turned upon them. The swirling white made it impossible to see more than a few yards. Regal roared, uncertain. Jon peered through the storm. Then a figure emerged, riding some ghastly undead beast, the Night King. His eyes glowed an unholy blue, piercing the darkness. Jon's breath caught. He had never seen the Night King this close before, only glimpses from a distance. The hatred, the icy malevolence, it cut like a blade. With impossible swiftness, the Night King hurled a spear of jaw. Get ice. Jon felt it coming, but Regal did not see it in time. The spear lodged into the dragon's flank, erupting in a spray of blood and a thunderous roar of pain. Jon's stomach clenched. Regal faltered, wing beats erratic, losing altitude. In desperation, Jon pulled on the harness, urging the dragon up. Another spear whistled by, missing them by a hair's breadth. For a moment, it seemed they might crash onto the castle rooftops. Regal howled, beating his wings. They sagged, then rose again, blood spattering the snowy rooftops below. Hold on, Jon cried, as though the dragon could understand. He could sense Regal's agony, the link between them flickering with pain and fear. The beast struggled on, fighting the mortal wound, refusing to crash. Jon tried to direct them away from the raging battle, to circle behind the keep, if only to land in the yard. But the storm raged, and the Night King's presence lingered in the swirling snow, ready to strike again. Another spear soared upward, shining with deadly purpose. Jon braced for the impact. Drogon appeared from the blizzard with a roar of defiance, Daenerys astride him. The black dragon clashed with the undead beast the Night King rode, grappling in midair in a maelstrom of scales and snapping jaws. Fire and ice collided in a deafening explosion. Jon glimpsed Daenerys clinging tight to the harness, her face streaked with soot and terror, as Drogon spewed flame at the Night King. The undead mount screeched, battered by the fire. For a moment, it seemed the Night King might fall from the skies. Then the Night King raised a hand, and an unnatural wind whirled around him, snuffing out the flames. Drogon recoiled, roaring. The two monstrous creatures grappled, savage claws tearing into each other's flesh. Daenerys nearly lost her seat. Jon tried to urge Regal to help, but the green dragon was too wounded, barely staying aloft. They drifted downward in a slow spiral toward the God's Wood, Regal hissing in pain. Blood left a trail across the sky. Finally, Regal could bear it no more, and he landed heavily among the ancient weirwood trees, smashing aside branches in a flurry of snow. Jon nearly fell from the saddle as the dragon collapsed, breathing raggedly. He scrambled free, stumbling in knee-deep snow. Darkness enveloped the God's Wood, lit only by the faint red glow of the heart tree's leaves and the flickers of distant flames on Winterfell's battlements. The dragon moaned, trembling. Jon's eyes burned with anger. Regal was dying or near to it. He stroked the dragon's muzzle, feeling hot blood trickle over his gloves. "I'm sorry," Jon whispered. A surge of savage guilt coursed through him. Regal blinked, letting out a final whimper. The dragon's breath slowed, the bond in Jon's mind going dim. Jon set his jaw, grief burning in his chest, but he forced himself to stand, turning toward the heart of the God's Wood. He had to find Bran, had to do what they planned, or Regal's sacrifice would be for nothing. Branches rustled in the cold breeze, the weirwood's carved face seeming to weep red sap tears. Bran Stark waited in his chair beneath the ancient tree, eyes rolled back in warging trance. Around him, whites lurked, creeping closer. The battle had reached the sanctuary. Jon drew Longclaw, the Valyrian steel glinting. He surged forward, cutting down a shrieking white that lunged. Another followed, then two more. He slashed and parried, burying the blade in undead flesh. The snow was soon littered with writhing corpses, but more kept coming, drawn by the presence of the three-eyed raven. Then the air went still. The temperature dropped further, biting into Jon's cheeks. He turned, sword ready. There, at the edge of the Godwood clearing, stood the Night King. Tall, gaunt, crowned with ice. Pale eyes pinned Jon in place. Around him, White Walkers emerged, carrying weapons of freezing mist. The time had come. Jon felt no fear now, only resolve. He remembered all the friends he'd lost, all the lives at stake. If he had to die here, so be it. But he would not go quietly. The Night King stepped forward, wordless malice emanating. Jon lunged, blade flashing. The White Walkers moved to intercept. Their frosty blades clashed with Longclaw, sending shards of ice tumbling. Jon fought with every ounce of skill gleaned from Ser Alyssa's lessons, from Jeor Mormont's campaigns, from a life spent on the edge of death. Yet the White Walkers were strong, unnaturally so. They struck with unearthly speed. One blow nearly shattered Jon's guard, and he staggered, twisting away at the last second. Longclaw came around in a desperate counterstrike, slicing through one walker's chest. It exploded in a shimmer of ice crystals, shrieking. Another took its place. Jon roared, pushing forward until he was face to face with the Night King. Their eyes locked. He swung with all his might, aiming for the creature's throat. The Night King raised an arm, catching the blade on an ice spear. Sparks flew as the Valyrian steel bit into the unnatural weapon, but did not break it. The Night King shoved Jon back. The force sent him sprawling in the snow. Winded, Jon struggled upright. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw more whites closing in, fangs bared. He could not fight them all. He braced himself for death. A roar split the night. Dragonfire bathed the Godwood, scorching the whites that surrounded Jon. He shielded his eyes from the searing brilliance. A massive shape crashed into the clearing Viserion. The cream and gold dragon landed, blasting undead in a swirl of flame. Jon seized the moment, darting to Bran's side. Bran's eyes snapped open as though he had awoken from a long vision. He looked at Jon. "You must finish this," Bran said in that eerie voice. "For all of us." The Night King advanced again, unaffected by the blast of flame that had incinerated his minions. Viserion spat another jet of fire, but the Night King raised a hand, forging a wall of ice that blocked the flames. The temperature plummeted. Frost gathered on Viserion's scales. Jon gritted his teeth, stepping protectively between Bran and their foe. He could not defeat the Night King in a simple duel. He needed something else. Some advantage. Suddenly, a blur of movement. Ghost lunged out of the shadows, sinking fangs into a white walker that had come too close to Jon's flank. The dire wolf snarled, his white fur stained red. Yet the white walker wrenched itself free, raising its blade. Ghost yelped in pain. Jon sprang, driving long claw through the walker's chest. It shattered into shards of ice, and Ghost collapsed, whining. Jon knelt beside him for an agonizing heartbeat. The dire wolf was wounded, blood matting his flank. He was still alive, but struggling. Rage ignited in Jon's veins. He stood, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the Night King. He was done running, done cowering. He roared and charged. The Night King hurled a spear of ice. Jon batted it aside with long claw. Frost licked at his hand, numbing his fingers, but he kept going. Another spear formed in the Night King's clawed hand. He threw it. At that instant, Viserion swooped low, wings brushing the treetops. Jon felt the dragon's presence in his mind, urging him to leap, to trust. With a final shout, Jon sprang onto Viserion's back, grabbing hold of a dangling strap. The ice spear whistled beneath them, missing by inches, and lodged into a weirwood trunk. Viserion soared upward, bearing Jon into the swirling snow above the godwood. Below, the Night King glared, furious. Another spear coalesced, glinting with lethal cold. Jon knew the monster would not stop until the dragon was brought down. But if Jon could strike first... He willed Viserion to dive, to bring him close enough for a single blow. The dragon roared in agreement, folding his wings. They plummeted toward the clearing like a comet. The Night King reared back, arm cocked to throw. At the last second, Viserion unleashed a torrent of flame, forcing the Night King to shield himself with ice magic. The spear's aim wavered. Jon leapt from Viserion's back, letting momentum hurl him down upon the Night King. He gripped Longclaw in both hands, raising it high. A final, desperate strike. The Night King turned, shock in those icy eyes. Jon's blade crashed down into the monster's body, Valyrian steel cleaving through ancient magic. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The Night King stared at Jon, mouth twisted in silent hatred. Then cracks spiderwebbed across the creature's torso, light spilling through as though from a hidden flame. The Night King shattered, exploding in a swirl of ice shards. An unholy scream rang out across Winterfell, echoing through the night. Jon fell to his knees, breath ragged. In every direction, whites collapsed, lifeless once more. The white walkers that remained howled and dissolved into icy shards, undone by their master's death. Silence at last. The storm faded, the wind dying. Snow drifted gently, settling over broken bodies and smoldering fires. Jon closed his eyes, relief coursing through him, along with bone-deep exhaustion. The war was over. The living had prevailed. He opened his eyes and saw Viserion, battered but alive, standing watchful, golden eyes fixed on him. The dragon let out a snort as though in acknowledgement. Slowly, others emerged. Arya, cheeks streaked with sweat and blood. Sansa, tears in her eyes, searching for survivors. Tormund, battered but grinning. The courtyard was a ruin of bodies, friends, foes, undead. But the threat of the Night King was ended. Jon rose unsteadily to his feet. He locked eyes with Daenerys, who approached on foot, limping, her face smudged with ash, Drogon perched on a broken tower behind her. They regarded each other across the carnage. "It's done," Jon said hoarsely. "He's gone." She nodded, tears shining. Then her gaze strayed to the place where Regal lay in a pool of blood. Jon's throat tightened. The price had been high. Dragons were not immortal, and war had taken its due. Daenerys closed her eyes for a moment as though mourning her lost child. Then she came forward, taking Jon's hand in hers. Words failed them both. They could only stand there, hearts pounding, in a swirl of mingled sorrow and triumph. Around them, the first survivors broke into cheering, or weeping, or both. Northmen, Unsullied, Dothraki, knights from the Vale. They had witnessed the impossible, the destruction of the army of the dead by dragon's flame and Valyrian steel. Bran watched from under the heart tree, his face unreadable. Ghost lay panting, injured but alive. Jon let out a shuddering breath, feeling the presence of Viserion in his mind, that bond still alive even if Regal's was gone. Together, they had ended the long night. He squeezed Daenerys' hand gently. In the days that followed, the living buried their dead. The snow was cleared, funeral pyres built. Northern tradition burned those who had fallen, ensuring none would rise again. Daenerys presided over Regal's pyre personally, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Jon stood at her side, remembering the day at Har Home when he had lost so many wildlings, remembering the first time he had touched Regal's scales. The dragons sang a mournful chorus, Drogon and Viserion circling overhead in sorrow. Flames engulfed the green dragon's body, sending sparks to the heavens. Winterfell was forever changed. The courtyard walls bore deep scars, and the hearts of its people carried the memory of white scratching at the gates. But they had survived the darkest winter. And now, with the Night King's threat ended, the realm looked toward the future, toward the question of who would rule, how alliances would hold, and what shape their world would take when spring finally came. Yet for Jon Snow or Aegon Targaryen, both names seemed to fit him now. His place was clearer than it had ever been. The dragons had chosen him. He had led them into battle, forging a bond that no other living soul, save Daenerys, could claim. He spoke with Sansa in the library on a cold evening. She gently pressed his hand, offering both comfort and the faintest hint of acceptance about his Targaryen blood. "You've always been my brother," she said softly. "And I know you're still the same man who saved me from Ramsay. Targaryen, Stark, it doesn't matter to me. You are my family." Her voice quavered and he clasped her hands in his, grateful beyond measure. Arya, ever the wolf, merely smirked and said, "If you want to go riding dragons instead of wearing a crown, that's your choice. Just don't forget we still have a family right here." A small, rare smile touched her lips. Bran gazed at Jon with those distant eyes. "You did what you were meant to do," he said in a quiet monotone. "I saw it in the visions. You were always meant to unite the living, to ride with fire against ice." And then he said no more, leaving Jon to wonder how deeply fate had guided them all. Daenerys lingered near a damaged tower, gazing over the north. She had lost so many in this war, her friends, her people, one of her beloved dragons. But she had gained the respect of a people who once despised her as a foreign conqueror. She had forged a bond with Jon that ran deeper than any alliance. One night, standing by the shattered ramparts, she turned to him, her face illuminated by torchlight. "Will you stay in the north?" she asked. "Now that your war is won." Jon exhaled, his breath misting in the frigid air. "My war was never truly separate from yours," he said. "The realm needs peace. And you still have a claim to press in the south." He studied her. "I won't abandon you. We fight together, whether that fight is against the dead or the tyrants in King's Landing." Her eyes shimmered with something like relief. "And the north? They named you king once. Will they name you again?" He hesitated, wrestling with the question of crowns and titles he had never wanted. "They might," he admitted softly, "or they might not. But if the realm is to be at peace, we need a ruler who can unite, not divide. Perhaps that is you." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. "I sometimes think the throne is a curse. 1,000 daggers aimed at your back, all for a seat of iron." Jon nodded. "I know. But for the sake of the living, it may be a burden that must be borne. You have me. And you have our dragons who will watch over us." She smiled, a small, sad smile. "Our dragons," she repeated as though tasting the phrase. "Yes. And you can ride them." He lowered his gaze. "I lost Regal," he said, voice thick. "He was as much yours as mine." "I'm sorry." She brushed her hand over his cheek. "He died protecting all of us. You gave him purpose." She inhaled. "Viserion still lives. Drogon still lives. We have each other, and we have them. And so long as that is true, we can keep going." The wind whispered across the ramparts. Jon drew her close, resting his forehead against hers. They stood there in silence, the hiss of the wind and the faint roar of distant dragons the only sounds. At dawn the next day, Jon walked out into the snow. The aftermath of victory weighed heavily on his shoulders, the cost etched into every stone of Winterfell. The single bright note was the knowledge that the army of the dead was no more. But the living world, with all its complexities, awaited them. In the distance, Viserion perched on a broken spire, golden eyes scanning the white horizon. Drogon soared overhead, letting out a long cry that echoed across the still air. Jon felt the bond flicker within him, the pull of the dragon's presence in his blood. Stepping into that open space, he raised an arm in a gesture of summons. Viserion stretched its neck, responding to the silent call. With a great beat of wings, the dragon descended, landing in a swirl of snow that sprayed around them. The creature regarded Jon with an intelligence that seemed far beyond a mere beast. Jon approached, placing a hand on Viserion's muzzle. A wave of warmth passed through him. This was the future, he realized. Not the petty squabbles of lords, not even the might of the armies, but the living bond between dragons and men who sought to end the dark. He remembered the stories old Nan had told him of heroes like Azor Ahai who wielded a flaming sword to banish the long night. Perhaps he was no such legendary figure, but he had played his part. And with Daenerys and the dragons at his side, he might yet shepherd Westeros into an era of peace. He heard footsteps in the snow behind him. He turned to see Daenerys approaching, cloak swirling. She gazed at him, then at the dragon, wonder in her eyes. In that unspoken moment, Jon knew that he would follow her to the ends of the earth because she carried the same fire that lit his soul. He had always been a man of duty, of sacrifice, but for the first time he saw a hope of forging something new from the ashes of war. Something better. No words were needed. Daenerys stepped beside him, her fingers slipping around his. Together, they touched Viserion's warm scales, feeling the pulsing life beneath. Above them, Drogon roared, circling overhead. In the quiet hush of winter's dawn, Jon Snow understood the truth of who he was. Not a bastard, not merely a Stark or a Targaryen, but a man who had fought the dead and won, and who held the trust of dragons born of fire. He was part of them, and they were part of him. And though their path forward was fraught with uncertainty, Cersei Lannister still lurked in the south. The question of the Iron Throne remained unsettled. He knew he would face it all with unflinching resolve. So they stood in the snowbound courtyard of Winterfell, with the hush of dawn lighting their faces, the swirling flakes drifting around the silent walls. A direwolf limped through the gates to press against Jon's leg, wounded but unbowed. And overhead, the last two dragons of House Targaryen soared, guardians of a realm that had come too close to eternal darkness. Jon closed his eyes, savoring the moment. He drew a long breath of icy air, and in his mind, he felt the living flame of dragons kindled in his own blood, blazing with the promise of a new beginning. Below is a single continuous narrative with no section breaks or subtitles, written in a novelistic style. It continues directly from the events previously described, in which the Night King has been destroyed and Regal has fallen, leaving Drogon and Viserion as the remaining dragons. It is an original piece of fan fiction imagining how the story might unfold if Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, were bonded to all three dragons, and now continues with two living dragons in the aftermath of the long night. The text is approximately 6,500 words in length. In the lingering darkness before dawn, Jon Snow stood alone beside Regal's ashen pyre in Winterfell's courtyard, long after the last mourners had quietly withdrawn. Most of the men and women, Northmen, Dothraki, Unsullied, had bowed their heads and whispered their farewells, scattering to find what sleep they could in the battered fortress. But Jon remained. He gazed at the pyre's dying embers with raw grief stretching through his chest. A hush enveloped the courtyard. The only sound was the distant howl of the northern wind and the occasional crackle of charred wood giving way. He knelt, bracing one hand against the sooty ground where Regal's great body had lain. A part of him still expected to feel the warmth of the dragon's spirit, the bond that had once thrummed in his veins. But Regal was gone, and that link was severed. He felt the absence keenly, like a phantom limb, as if a piece of his soul had been burned alongside those emerald scales. He swallowed, forcing himself to rise. So many had perished to stop the Night King, old friend. And new allies alike. But somehow losing Regal struck at the core of him. The dragon had given its life so they all might see another dawn. When he turned, he found Daenerys watching him quietly from a few paces away, her white hair unbound in the wind. She wore a thick fur cloak over her usual attire, and a tremor of grief flickered across her face. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words failed him, so they simply stared at one another in the half-light. He was the first to move, stepping closer until the smell of ash and char surrounded them both. "He was your child," Jon said softly, his voice rough. "And I'm sorry." Daenerys shook her head, tears catching the faint glimmer of torchlight. "He was ours, Jon," she whispered. "He accepted you as a rider in a way I've never seen before. We lost him in battle, but we saved the living from the dead. He fought with honor." She paused, drawing a shaky breath. I wish all my children could have survived this war." Jon's throat felt tight. "We have to hold on to what remains. We owe them that much." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheek. Softly, she reached out and took Jon's gloved hand in hers. "Yes?" she murmured, glancing toward the upper ramparts, where Drogon and Viserion roost. The black dragon perched atop a crumbled battlement, watchful and imposing against the fading night. Viserion rested not far off, occasionally releasing a tremulous note that felt like mourning for his brother. It had taken gentle coaxing to calm them both after Regal's death, but they would endure. The bond between Jon and Viserion remained, a fragile but living flame in the corners of Jon's mind. At last, Daenerys let out a trembling exhale. "We cannot linger here forever," she said quietly. "We have a realm to mend. The dead are gone, but the living remain, along with all the injustices that were never resolved. And Cersei Lannister still sits the Iron Throne, no doubt strengthening her hold on King's Landing." Jon's gaze fell to the battered courtyard. "The North is wounded," he said, "but once we've buried our dead, we'll have to decide our next move. The people need rest, provisions. Sansa will want time to rebuild. Arya has her own way of helping, and Bran." Jon trailed off, recalling the almost supernatural calm in Bran's eyes. He sees all of this from another perspective. Daenerys studied Jon carefully. "We will not force the North into another war overnight, but we cannot let Cersei rebuild her strength unopposed. Our victory here means nothing if a tyrant still reigns in the South." Jon knew she was right, yet he also felt the weight of the North's exhaustion. Perhaps the living had secured the greatest triumph imaginable, halting the endless night. But war's hammer struck again and again, forging or shattering alliances. He lifted his chin and met Daenerys' eyes with quiet determination. "We'll gather the lords and see what can be done," he said. "Once we are strong enough, we'll march south. The queen in the north, the queen in the south, we can't remain divided forever." She squeezed his hand in silent agreement. The wind hissed around them, carrying the faint taste of burned flesh. He glanced back at the pyre one last time. Regal's spirit was gone, but the memory would remain. With a final resolute nod, Jon turned, guiding Daenerys back into the keep where the night's shadows still lingered. Dawn would be upon them soon, and with it the burdens of leadership that would not wait. Over the next few days, Winterfell settled into a somber rhythm. The castle was crowded with survivors, many wounded, some shell-shocked, all of them weary. The Great Hall became a makeshift infirmary where Maester Wolkan and a cadre of healers moved among pallets of the injured, distributing meager supplies. The stench of herbs, blood, and sweat clung to the air. The Dothraki muttered about the bitter cold, huddling near braziers in the courtyard. The Unsullied observed their stoic discipline, patrolling the ramparts against any lingering threat. Snow drifted constantly from gray skies, dusting the bodies of fallen wights that still littered the outer fields. Jon stood with Davos Seaworth atop the eastern wall one grim afternoon, scanning the horizon for signs of fresh trouble. Tormund Giantsbane strode up beside them, a thick cloak wrapped around his broad shoulders. He still carried a bandage on his forearm from the fighting, but otherwise looked undaunted. He peered across the snow-swept expanse, brow furrowed. "Never thought I'd see the day," Tormund said quietly, "when a dragon and a dire wolf fought side by side to save the living. We've done the impossible." Davos nodded, rubbing his gloved hands together for warmth. "The impossible's become something of a habit for us, hasn't it? First Hardhome, then the Wall, now Winterfell. But we paid dearly." Jon sighed, remembering Regal, Theon, Yora, and the countless men and women whose bodies now lay in mass pyres or graves. "Yes, we did," he answered. "We can't forget that. We owe it to them to build a better world from the ashes." Davos gave him a sideways look. "Well said, Your Grace. Though I suspect many in the north will look to you for that better world." Jon's jaw tensed. He had already heard the murmurings among the lords who had survived, that Jon Snow had once more saved them, that he was not only a king in the north but a dragon rider blessed by the old gods. And in hushed corners, some whispered that he was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, a rumor fueled by the knowledge of his Targaryen blood, which had slowly leaked out to those closest to him. Sansa knew, Arya knew, and people had eyes. They saw the way the dragons responded to him. In time, it would be impossible to hide. He glanced at Davos. "I never asked for crowns or thrones. I only want the living to be safe." Davos's expression softened. "We believe you, Jon. But the realm is as hungry for hope as it is for bread. You might find you cannot refuse the mantle they place on you, especially with 2 dragons in your command." Jon gave a noncommittal grunt and went back to surveying the snow cape. Off in the distance, he saw a solitary figure trudging along the half-buried road, likely a survivor or scout returning. The storms rolled in faster this time of year, and he felt a chill beyond the mere cold of wind. The wars of men were about to resume, whether he willed it or not. On the 5th day after the battle, the makeshift council convened in Winterfell's great hall, with the battered high table cleared of debris. The main hearth blazed, attempting to chase off the cold that crept in through the ancient stones. Daenerys presided at one end of the table, a calm but firm presence. Tyrion Lannister and Varys flanked her, with Missandei standing close by. Grey Worm remained outside on the walls, ensuring the castle's security. Jon joined them, standing near Sansa, who wore a solemn expression and draped herself in heavy furs. Arya leaned against a pillar behind her sister, arms folded. Bran sat off to the side in his wheeled chair, gazing into the flames with his unsettling calm. Clustered around were the northern lords who survived, Lord Glover, Lady Mormont, Lord Royce of the Vale, and a smattering of knights from the Riverlands. Tormund and Davos stood near the corner, silent watchers. The hush of the room felt thick, as though an argument had already begun even before a word was spoken. It was Daenerys who broke the silence. "You have fought for me. You have died for me," she began quietly, her gaze sweeping across faces that ranged from loyal to hesitant. "And I have fought for you as well, burned the dead, risked my dragons, nearly lost everything. We owe each other our lives. Let that stand for something." Sansa inclined her head in measured acknowledgement. "We do not forget what you've done, Your Grace. Nor do we forget that the North has always guarded against threats from beyond the wall. We are a weary people, but not ungrateful." Tyrion cleared his throat. "Be that as it may, we must consider the next steps. The Night King is gone, and that is a great victory, but Queen Cersei remains in King's Landing. She will doubtless use this time to fortify her position. Even now, she may be forging new alliances with the Iron Bank or the Golden Company." Lady Mormont lifted her chin. "Another war," she muttered. "The North is bled dry from the last one. We can't simply march south to spill more blood, not without cause." Daenerys' eyes flicked to Jon. "We have cause if we seek a realm of peace rather than one dominated by Cersei Lannister's tyranny. We also have some advantage. 2 dragons remain to us." She did not speak Regal's name, but the sorrow in her voice was plain. Jon stepped forward, turning to face the gathered lords. "If we allow Cersei to strengthen her grip, all we've done here may be for nothing. She can starve the North, isolate it, pick our allies apart. And do not forget that Euron Greyjoy's fleet roams the seas. We must stand together." A ripple of uncertain muttering moved through the room. Lord Royce frowned. "Perhaps we should consolidate. Rebuild. If we move too soon, we risk everything." Arya broke in with quiet intensity. "Cersei won't wait. She'll strike at us the moment it serves her best." Sansa drew a slow breath. "We cannot keep the armies here forever. The Dothraki are not suited to life in the North. The Unsullied require supplies. We must feed them, clothe them, and Winterfell's stores will not last. Even so, I will not commit the North to a hopeless assault if we are not prepared." Daenerys glanced at Tyrion, who shifted his weight. "We must gather more information," the dwarf advised. "Scout the roads south. Perhaps open lines of communication with lords still in the Crownlands or Stormlands who resent the Lannisters. We cannot assume every house in the south remains loyal to Cersei." Varys nodded gravely. "Indeed, men follow power. If they see 2 Targaryens riding dragons, fresh from defeating the dead, they may prove open to discussion." Jon looked at Sansa and the others. "Give us time to rally. We'll strengthen Winterfell's defenses so it can stand if Cersei retaliates. After that, we move to liberate the realm from her rule. The North, the Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, if we unite them, we might avoid a long, bloody siege." Lady Mormont pursed her lips but relented. "If the war must come, the North will do its duty, as we always have." Sansa exhaled slowly. "I'll oversee the reorganization of Winterfell, get the wounded healed, and ration supplies. You," she paused, giving Daenerys a measured look, "and Jon can coordinate the southern plans with Tyrion and Varys." "Thank you," Daenerys said, inclining her head. "We appreciate your cooperation in these uncertain times." The council dissolved soon after, leaving a residue of tension in its wake. Jon watched the northern lords depart, shoulders sagging under the weight of looming decisions. He felt Daenerys step up beside him. She spoke in a quiet voice meant for his ears alone. "We'll need to show them that we stand together," she said. "Not just in words, but in truth." He nodded. "It's all we can do. They know me. They trust me, or they did, once. If they see us at odds, they'll never bend." "They've seen how you fought for them," Daenerys replied. "They've seen the dragon you lost in defending their home. They will come around." There was a hint of determination in her tone, the same fierce resolve that had carried her across the seas. Jon managed a faint grin. All we need to do is topple a queen who commands the largest city in the realm, allied with a ruthless pirate and bankrolled by the richest institution in Essos. Simple. Daenerys gave a wry huff. Simple indeed. But we have dragons and we have the will to use them. Let Cersei cower behind her walls. If she cannot be swayed by reason or by the realm's greater good, we'll bring fire. And perhaps we will not be alone in that cause. She glanced meaningfully at him, an unspoken question flickering in her violet eyes. Jon felt the weight of his hidden lineage hanging in the air between them, a truth that might complicate everything if it became common knowledge. He made no reply, only laid a hand gently over hers, letting her warmth dispel the chill that clung to him. A few days later, the courtyard bustled with renewed vigor. Workers repaired the shattered gates, hammered fresh boards over jagged holes in the walls, and carefully reset stone bricks that had fallen during the siege. The smell of freshly cut timber wafted on the wind. White Harbor had sent a small train of wagons laden with salted fish, dried grains, and other provisions, allowing Winterfell to stretch its stores a bit further. Sansa coordinated it all with the meticulous efficiency she had learned by surviving the worst of the Lannisters and Peter Baelish. Lady Mormont returned to Bear Island to gather what remained of her people, promising to rejoin if the war moved south. In the stables, the Dothraki tended their horses, restless for open fields and battle. Their screeching laughter echoed across the bailey whenever they tested each other's skill with the rocks. Not far from them, Grey Worm supervised a detachment of Unsullied as they drilled with spears. Tyrion and Varys huddled around a rough map table inside the keep, discussing which lords might be swayed through diplomacy or intimidation. Daenerys wrote letters by the fire, the flickering light dancing over her pale hair. Missandei served as scribe, penning each missive with elegant precision in the common tongue and sometimes in High Valyrian. Jon divided his time between these tasks and the dragons themselves. Viserion had taken to roosting atop one of the gatehouse towers, dislodging stones whenever he shifted his weight. The battered ramparts gave him little to perch on comfortably, but the beast refused to remain in the courtyard. Drogon preferred to laze near the training yard, soaking up what feeble sunlight broke through the northern clouds. At times, the black dragon would rouse, letting out a thunderous roar that spooked horses and men alike. Jon learned to sense their moods even from across the castle. He felt the faint flickers of their hunger, their impatience with confinement, their curiosity about the swirling activity below. On one raw morning, he decided to fly with Viserion again, not to practice for war, but to renew the bond that had been battered by Regal's death. He found Viserion coiled on a patch of scorched ground outside the walls where the heat of the funeral pyres still lingered. When Jon approached, the dragon lifted its massive head, gold and cream scales rippling in the pale light. A low rumble sounded in its throat, questioning. Jon paused just out of reach. "Easy," he murmured, carefully raising a gloved hand. The beast huffed, smoke curling from its nostrils. Jon sensed a subtle grief mirrored in the creature's consciousness, as though Viserion still felt the absence of its sibling. "I'm sorry," Jon whispered. "I'm so sorry." With infinite slowness, he stepped closer, letting the dragon inhale his scent. Viserion rumbled again, more softly, then leaned forward until its snout brushed Jon's hand. A flush of warmth coursed through Jon's limbs as that intangible link crackled to life. He laid his other hand on the dragon's jawline, feeling the ridges of scale that radiated heat. A swirl of memories washed over him. Memories of Regal, of the flight above Winterfell spires, of the confrontation in the Godswood. The sorrow pressed against him like an iron weight. "We go on," he said quietly, meeting Viserion's molten gaze. "For Regal's sake. For all of us." The dragon huffed, and in that breath, Jon felt acceptance. With a nod, he moved to the harness that Heed had repaired by the castle's leatherworkers. The straps were thick, yet it still made him ache to recall how Regal had crashed in this very yard. Still, he needed to keep going. He cinched the harness in place around Viserion's chest, then used a length of wooden scaffolding as a step to climb up. Every muscle tensed at the memory of that deadly spear, the fear of falling. He pushed it aside, settling into the saddle as best he could. "Fly," he said softly, leaning forward. Viserion extended its wings, the membranes trembling in the wind. The beast gave two powerful beats, stirring snow into swirling eddies. The ground lurched away beneath them as they rose, the castle courtyard shrinking. Men below shouted or pointed, horses whinnying in alarm. Jon clutched the harness, leaning with the dragon as it angled over the towers. Adrenaline rushed through his veins. He heard his own heartbeat pounding, and Viserion's heart beating in time. They soared past the broken battlements, the frigid wind lashing Jon's face. He breathed in the biting cold, feeling more alive than he had in days. Down in the training yard, he glimpsed Daenerys looking up from behind the walls, a hand shielding her eyes. Drogon stirred at her side, letting out a brief roar. Viserion trumpeted an answering cry, as though greeting its mother. Jon urged the dragon higher, and they climbed above Winterfell's tallest tower, the entirety of the snowy courtyard visible below. The sprawl of tents and hastily erected shelters for the wounded stretched beyond the walls. Beyond that, the north rolled away in icy fields and dark forests. The flight was brief, just enough to circle the stronghold and test Viserion's healing from the last battle. The dragon still bore scars from undead claws and the brush of freezing magic, but it moved smoothly, strong enough to remain aloft. When they landed again, Jon felt both exhausted and renewed. Daenerys met him as he slid off Viserion's flank, her expression somewhere between relief and cautious pride. "Your bond is as strong as ever," she said, lightly touching the harness buckle to help him free himself. "How did it feel?" He let out a shaky breath. "Like letting go of my fears and sorrow, if only for a moment." "Viserion's still mourning, Regal. I can feel it." She nodded, her hand lingering on Viserion's side, stroking the scarred scales. "They are more sensitive than people think. They mourn, they rage, they love." She looked at Jon, eyes glistening. "You share the bond with them. They are yours as they are mine." Jon held her gaze. "Then let's hope they remain ours for the battles to come." Over the subsequent weeks, the battered forces at Winterfell began to regain strength. Scouts returned with word that Cersei had indeed fortified King's Landing, blocking all roads leading to the city with loyal Lannister soldiers and Sells words from the Golden Company. Rumor held that Euron Greyjoy's Iron Fleet patrolled Blackwater Bay. Supplies were being hoarded behind the capital's walls. Common folk were said to be starving, taxed beyond measure. Any lord who dared protest was quickly silenced. In the cramped solar where Tyrion and Varys plotted, a new map had been unrolled showing the southern regions in detail. Tyrion tapped a small symbol of a lion near King's Landing, signifying the Lannister hold. "We can't attack directly by sea," he said one chilly evening, warming his hands over a brazier. "Euron's fleet would pick us off, and the city's scorpions, those massive anti-dragon ballistae, are rumored to be much improved. Attacking from the air may not be as safe as it was before." Varys nodded, his face grave. "Nor can we rely on starving the city. If we lay siege for too long, the realm will fracture further. We need a decisive blow." Daenerys, seated behind a small table, drummed her fingers. "On the wood. We won't repeat the mistakes I made at the loot train battle or near King's Landing. We must consider the innocent people inside those walls. I want them to see that I am not the same as Cersei, that I do not slaughter indiscriminately." Her expression darkened. "But if Cersei leaves us no choice?" Jon stood by the wall, arms folded, considering the map. There might be a way to force her hand without burning the city. He glanced at Tyrion. "Storm's End remains empty, does it not? The Baratheon keep. If we took that castle, we'd have a strategic position on the southern coast. Euron's fleet might be challenged from land if we muster enough allied ships from the Reach or Dorne." Tyrion's eyes lit with cautious interest. "Storm's End has formidable walls, near impossible to breach from the sea. Legend says no one has ever taken it by force. But if we arrive from the air with dragons, it might be a swift campaign. And if the castle's garrison is small or disloyal to Cersei, we could slip in." Varys stroked his chin. "A bold plan. If Storm's End were ours, it would give us a foothold from which to negotiate or threaten King's Landing's southern flank. It might also inspire lords in the Stormlands to rally behind you or behind Jon." Daenerys's gaze flickered to Jon. "Then that's where we begin," she decided. "If Storm's End can be taken, we might gather more allies and draw Cersei out. We should move swiftly before she tightens her grip further." They worked late into the night, assembling details. Grey Worm would lead a portion of the Unsullied to the Stormlands, supported by a detachment of Dothraki and any northern knights willing to ride south. Sansa would remain in Winterfell, ensuring the North's security with the Vale forces supporting her if trouble arose. Jon and Daenerys would fly ahead on Drogon and Viserion, scouting the approach and securing safe landings for the main host. Gendry, rumored to be Robert Baratheon's bastard, might have a claim that could help persuade locals to open the gates. For good or ill, the stage was set for the next phase of war. When the day of departure arrived, the sun rose on clear skies, a rare reprieve from the north's relentless snowfall. Packed columns of soldiers formed in Winterfell's courtyard, banners snapping in the wind. The Unsullied, disciplined as ever, stood in neat rows, their spears glinting. The Dothraki were less orderly, prancing on their horses and whooping at the slightest provocation. Northerners who volunteered for the southern campaign wore heavy cloaks over chainmail, determined expressions on their faces. Sansa bid Jon a stiff farewell near the gates, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked weary, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "Bring them home alive if you can," she murmured, glancing at the gathered men. "We've lost too many already." Jon gave a solemn nod. "I'll do my best. And if the worst comes, you hold the North together. The realm will need the Starks." Her gaze flicked to Daenerys, who stood at a distance, speaking with Tyrion. "We will see what shape the realm takes after all this. I hope it's one worth living in." Jon touched his sister's hand gently, then turned to mount his horse, Ghost trotting beside him, half limping on his injured leg. Nearby, Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's back with practiced ease, while Viserion landed heavily in the courtyard, stirring up a flurry of snow. The combined roars of both dragons set men's hearts pounding. Jon felt that rush of connection as Viserion lowered its neck for him. He strapped himself into the harness with a swift series of motions. The wound in Regal's memory still throbbed somewhere in his mind, but he refused to give in to fear. He would do this. He had to. With a thunderous leap, Drogon soared into the sky, Daenerys astride him, cloak whipping in the wind. Viserion launched after them, and Jon clenched his jaw as the courtyard vanished below. For a moment, dread coiled in his gut. Would an errant spear come hissing from the ramparts? No, those days were over, he reminded himself. The only danger lay in the battles yet to come. He steered Viserion in a wide arc, waiting for the main column to file out of Winterfell's gates. Then he and Daenerys angled south, wings beating in unison, forging ahead as the vanguard of the new war. The flight across the north was harsh but beautiful. Vast fields of snow gleamed in the sunlight, occasional pine forests dotting the white expanse like islands in a frosty sea. Villages far below braved winter's chill, sending up thin plumes of smoke. Jon felt an ache in his chest to see how small and isolated they were. The realm had always been a patchwork of vulnerabilities, and how quickly men forgot the horrors that lurked beyond their borders. Each time they alighted to rest, perching the dragons in sheltered valleys or hilltops, Jon found himself drawn into quiet moments with Daenerys. They would share rations of dried meat and bread, sometimes exchanging only a few words. There was comfort in her presence, though a sense that they were forging a new chapter in Westeros's history, forging it in the wind and sun above the petty quarrels that had once consumed them. Yet the unspoken tension also lingered. The knowledge of Jon's birthright, the question of how the North would accept Daenerys, the memory of Regal's fiery death. Nothing was simple, but for fleeting moments, they let the future remain unspoken. At last, after days of flight and nights camping in half-ruined keeps or open fields, the landscape shifted. The snow receded, giving way to the rolling green hills of the Stormlands, though winter still clung to the air, painting the land in a muted palette. Dark, gnarled oaks lined the narrow roads that led toward Storm's End. The castle itself perched on a cliff overlooking a churning sea, its thick walls hammered by centuries of relentless storms. Legend claimed that Bran the Builder himself had raised those walls. Jon thought of the old stories, how Storm's End had withstood countless sieges, including one by the Targaryens during Robert's rebellion. Jon and Daenerys observed from the sky, circling beyond the fortress's range. The waves below crashed against jagged rocks, sending salt spray high into the air. Drogon let out a cry that was lost in the howling wind. Viserion hovered at a distance, flapping mightily. From their vantage, the fortress looked formidable indeed, a massive outer wall that curved around the keep, with no windows or openings near the base and tall, drum-shaped towers that bristled with archers. They descended behind a windswept ridge, out of arrow range, letting the dragons rest. Tyrion, Varys, and Grey Worm arrived soon after with a small vanguard of Unsullied, picking their way through the rocky terrain. Gendry came with them, looking uneasy but determined, his warhammer strapped across his back. The main host was still half a day behind, marching more slowly. The plan was to make contact first, to see if Storm's End's Castellan might open the gates without bloodshed. Tyrion dismounted from his horse, eyes narrowed as he surveyed the fortress walls in the near distance. "Imposing," he muttered. "They say the storms here can tear a ship's mast in half." Gendry, shifting his weight from foot to foot, nodded. It was once my father's seat, though I never set foot in it. If they know I carry Baratheon blood, it might help." Daenerys regarded the castle with a cold, assessing gaze. Or it might not. The Castellan might be loyal to Cersei, or they might fear retribution. "We have to be careful." Varys's voice was soft in the wind. "A direct assault would be costly. Perhaps a show of dragons overhead will loosen their resolve before any gates must be broken." Grey Worm, stoic in his armor, said nothing but laid a hand on his spear, as though readying for a fight. A hush fell over the group and Daenerys looked to Jon. He realized they were waiting for his thoughts, for him to speak with the authority of the man who had saved Winterfell and ridden dragons. It still felt strange to him, but he cleared his throat. "Let's approach with caution," he said. "Daenerys will stay on Drogon, circling from above. Viserion and I will do the same. Tyrion and Gendry can approach the gates with a small contingent. Declare our intentions. We want the castle's peaceful surrender and an alliance under the Targaryen banner, or at least neutrality. If they refuse, or if we see archers knocking arrows, the dragons will make a show of force. We won't storm the gates blindly." Daenerys nodded, a flame of confidence in her eyes. "Agreed. Keep casualties to a minimum. If it comes to a siege, I'd rather do it with cunning than with fire." They wasted no time. Within the hour, Tyrion and Gendry rode forward with a handful of unsullied standard-bearers. Their blue banners fluttered in the wind, and Gendry wore a cloak emblazoned with a black stag on gold, borrowed from a battered old sigil they'd found. Meanwhile, Jon took to the skies on Viserion, Daenerys on Drogon. They rose in the swirling gusts of the Stormlands, salt spray lashing their faces. From above, they watched as Tyrion halted at a safe distance from the gates, calling for parley. A cluster of men atop the battlements peered down. The conversation that followed was lost to the wind, but Jon could guess the gist. Tyrion introducing himself as Hand of the True Queen, Gendry revealing his Baratheon heritage, urging them to open the gates peacefully. At intervals, the men on the walls glanced up nervously at the dragons circling overhead. Drogon let out a roar, flames licking at the corners of his jaws, but Daenerys kept him at a distance. Viserion hovered near, responding to Jon's subtle tugs on the harness. He felt the dragon's excitement and tension. After a tense standoff, the portcullis rattled upward. A tall, rangy knight emerged with several men at arms. Tyrion dismounted to meet them. Jon strained to see the expressions, but the distance was too great. Finally, Tyrion and Gendry vanished inside, presumably to speak with the Castellan. Grey Worm signaled from below, giving them the all-clear. Jon exchanged a glance with Daenerys, and together they guided their dragons to land on a rocky outcrop that faced the castle. They waited, scanning the fortress for any sign of treachery. The hours crawled by. The wind picked up, bringing dark clouds from the sea. Jon paced on the outcrop, occasionally resting a hand on Viserion's side to steady his nerves. Daenerys stood at the edge, cloak whipping around her, eyes fixed on the gates. At last, the portcullis opened again, and Tyrion and Gendry emerged, still alive and apparently unharmed. They trotted out to the ridge, breath pluming in the air. "Well?" Daenerys demanded, stepping forward. Tyrion slid off his horse, exhaling. "Ser Justin Massey is Castellan here, a minor Stormlands knight with no great love for Cersei. They have a small garrison short on supplies. When Gendry told them who he is, and we emphasized you have 2 dragons, they decided that surrender might be advisable." Gendry, looking somewhat awed by the castle's vast halls, nodded. "They want assurances that their men won't be harmed, that we won't pillage the keep. They also asked if I might remain as the castle's steward, given my father's claim." Daenerys's expression softened slightly. "You've done well, both of you. We'll give them our terms." They opened the gates, They recognize me as their queen, and they pledge not to harbor any Lannister forces. In return, their lives and property will be spared. We'll garrison a portion of our Unsullied here to secure it as a forward base, if they'll allow it." Tyrion nodded. Ser Justin seemed inclined to accept. He's no great lord, but he holds Storm's End for now. If we treat him with honor, he'll spread word that you are no monster. A ghost of a grin touched Tyrion's mouth. At least, no more monstrous than 2 dragons and a horde of foreign soldiers might suggest. Jon glanced at Gendry. "Are you comfortable staying here? Your forging skills might be missed, but if you can secure loyalty in the Stormlands." Gendry shrugged. "I'm no politician, but if it helps your cause, I'll do it. I can keep the forges running in Storm's End, too, and maybe supply your army with better weapons." Daenerys touched Gendry's shoulder lightly. "Then stay with our blessing. Prove your worth, and the Stormlands might name you their lord in truth. A new Baratheon for a new age." A flicker of pride crossed Gendry's face. "Thank you, your grace." He turned, gazing at the towering walls. "I never imagined I'd walk through those gates, let alone as something more than a bastard." They wasted no time formalizing the arrangement. Ser Justin led his men to open Storm's End fully, allowing a small detachment of Unsullied to take up positions on the battlements and gatehouse. The rest of Daenerys' host would arrive in the coming days, using Storm's End as a temporary encampment. Jon, Daenerys, and Tyrion walked through the fortress's main courtyard, the wind howling overhead. The thick walls blocked the worst of it, but the sound of crashing waves reverberated through the stones. Archers peered down warily, though no one dared raise a bow with 2 dragons perched just beyond the walls. Ser Justin, a lanky man with thinning hair, guided them to the great hall, an echoing chamber of stone pillars lit by guttering torches. A tattered Baratheon banner hung from the rafters. At the dais stood a sturdy wooden chair, overshadowed by the memory of the seat once used by the Storm Lords. Dust clung to every surface. The meager garrison lined the edges, uncertain how to receive their new queen. Daenerys removed her gloves, letting her silver braids spill over her shoulder as she addressed them. "I claim Storm's End as a loyal seat of House Targaryen," she announced, her clear voice cutting through the chamber. "You will remain here under the watch of my Unsullied. We will not harm you or your families. We fight for a realm free of tyranny. Join us, and you will be part of its future. Resist, and—" She let the words hang, reminding them of the dragons outside. Ser Justin bowed, as did several knights behind him. "We yield, your grace," he said, though a tremor betrayed his anxiety. "Will you be staying here?" Daenerys shook her head. "Not for long. We move on King's Landing soon enough. But first, we must strengthen our foothold and gather allies. Ser Gendry Waters Baratheon, as we name him, will remain in Storm's End, overseeing these lands on my behalf. Any who swear loyalty will find favor here. Those who betray us will answer to him, and to me." Gendry stood at her side, a mixture of awe and determination visible in his eyes. He offered Ser Justin a courteous nod. "I hope we can work together. Storm's End was built to withstand the worst storms. Let's make sure it endures, whatever storms are still to come." Tyrion stood by, making mental notes, no doubt thinking about how to spin this victory in letters to lords across the Stormlands. Jon watched quietly, weighed down by the sense that each step forward only brought them closer to an inevitable clash with Cersei. The fortress had fallen without a drop of dragonfire shed, which was a victory. But the real test lay in how the rest of Westeros would respond. When the main host arrived the following day, tents sprang up in the shadow of Storm's End's colossal walls. Dothraki riders tested the local hills, galloping dangerously close to the cliff edges, whooping at the crashing surf below. The Unsullied divided their ranks, some in the fortress proper, others camping outside. Northern knights lingered uneasily and used to the damp, windy climate. Supplies were carried in from small villages that decided it was wiser to trade with the new army than oppose it. Through it all, Jon and Daenerys did their best to maintain order, ensuring no outrages were committed against the local populace. They knew that if they brought fear instead of hope, they would be no better than Cersei. Late one afternoon, Jon and Daenerys walked the ramparts of Storm's End together. The wind tore at their cloaks, shrieking around the parapets. Below, the sea heaved, dark green waves smashing into the cliff face. Ahead, beyond the watery horizon, lay King's Landing. A day's ride by land, maybe two. A short flight for dragons, though the scorpions, those monstrous ballistae, awaited them. Jon's hair whipped across his forehead and he cast a sideways look at Daenerys, who stared out over the waves. "She won't let us take King's Landing without a fight," Daenerys said after a long silence. "She knows we're coming, especially now that we've taken Storm's End." Jon inhaled the briny air. "Let her fight. If the city's people rise against her, or if they open the gates, we can spare lives. But if they stand by her out of fear..." Daenerys' jaw tightened. "I want to save the people of King's Landing, not punish them for being born under the Lannisters' rule. But if I must use Drogon and Viserion to break the gates, I will." Jon thought of the horrifying power the dragons could unleash. He thought of Regal and how he'd soared over the undead, scorching them in a last stand. A pang of guilt gripped him. He never wanted to see that level of carnage inflicted on innocent people. "We should try to parley," he said. "Offer terms. Maybe even use your spies. We might avoid a siege if enough of the city turns on her." Daenerys nodded, though her eyes remained on the churning sea. "We can offer terms. But I doubt Cersei will listen. She's tasted power too long." Jon placed a hand on the cold stone of the battlements, feeling the fortress shudder under a strong gust. "There's another matter," he said softly. "When we present ourselves at King's Landing, the realm will see me riding alongside you on a dragon. They'll wonder about me, why a northerner commands such power. Sooner or later, they'll learn I'm Aegon Targaryen." Daenerys turned to him at last, her expression flickering with uncertainty. "Yes," she murmured. "I've thought about it. And I've feared what it might do to us." Jon let out a ragged breath. "They'll say I have a stronger claim than you. That I am Rhaegar's son, the rightful heir. This might splinter our allies, no matter our wishes. I never wanted this." She drew closer so he could feel her warmth against the wind. "I know," she said, placing a hand on his chest. "Nor did I. But we cannot deny the truth. If the lords of Westeros learn who you are, some will flock to your banner. Others will resent you as a usurper. It could tear us apart." Jon's heart pounded. "We have to stand together. No matter what they say about my claim, I will refuse any crown that sets me against you. My only wish is to protect the realm, our realm." She pressed her forehead to his, eyes drifting shut. For a moment, the wind's roar subsided in Jon's mind, replaced by the steady pulse of his blood. "Then we'll face it together," she whispered. "Targaryen or not, you are Jon and I am Daenerys. We've come this far." He wanted to kiss her, to lose himself in the promise that somehow they could navigate this tangle of lineage and loyalty. But behind them, the sound of booted footsteps approached, a guard patrol. They broke apart, turning to see Grey Worm approach, a letter in his hand, edges damp from the mist. "This arrived, Your Grace," the commander said, handing the missive to Daenerys. She took it, brows knitted as she read. Jon saw her lips compress in growing tension. "What is it?" he asked. Daenerys folded the letter and gazed out over the sea once more, her hair sweeping acro. Says her face. "Word from King's Landing," she said, a bitter edge to her tone. "Cersei has declared me a foreign invader and you a traitorous pretender to the north. She boasts that she has the Golden Company at her beck and call, and Euron Greyjoy's fleet in Blackwater Bay. She warns us to turn back or face annihilation." Daenerys' throat worked as she swallowed. "She says she has thousands of refugees crammed into the city, where any dragonfire would burn them alive. She's daring us to strike, to make us the villains in the eyes of the realm." Jon felt a chill run deeper than the wind. Cersei would indeed use innocence as a shield, forcing Daenerys to either abandon the assault or become the Butcher Queen. "We can't let that happen," he said fiercely. "We can't let her manipulate us into slaughtering helpless people." Daenerys' eyes flashed with mingled outrage and sorrow. "Then we find another way," she said. "We break her power in the field, or we turn the city against her from within. But I swear this, I will not become what she accuses me of." Jon nodded, setting his jaw. "Then let us plan carefully. We have Storm's End. We can gather more allies, strike at her supply lines, draw her out." She turned to Grey Worm. "Send out word to Dorne, the Reach, and even the Riverlands. If they'll stand against Cersei, we will see them rewarded once she falls. And prepare the host to march north of King's Landing, to cut off her caravans. We will not give her the satisfaction of an easy battle." Grey Worm bowed and departed. Jon and Daenerys lingered on the ramparts a while longer, letting the salt-laced wind whip around them. Below, the sea churned ceaselessly. Far away, in the heart of the capital, Cersei Lannister tightened her hold on the Iron Throne, using the common folk as pawns. The taste of another war lingered like bitterness on Jon's tongue. But at least they had come this far without torching Storm's End or fueling old hatreds. If they could keep walking that narrow path, perhaps they might deliver Westeros from the cycle of endless bloodshed. That night, as the fortress settled into fitful sleep, Jon found himself unable to rest. He wandered the echoing halls until his feet led him to a small courtyard perched on the seaward side of Storm's End. Stars gleamed overhead, and the thunder of the surf was louder here, reverberating off the stone. He expected solitude, but instead found Tyrion sitting on a low wall, a half-filled wineskin at his side, regarding the moonlit waves. Tyrion glanced up, the flicker of torchlight revealing exhaustion etched on his face. "Jon Snow," he said with a wry tilt of his head. Or should I say, Aegon Targaryen? So many names in one man. Makes me glad I'm just Tyrion Lannister. Jon shifted uneasily, realizing Tyrion was one of the few who knew the truth. "Tyrion," he said quietly, stepping closer. "Is everything all right?" A humorless chuckle. "Oh, everything's splendid. We have a tenuous hold on the Stormlands, an enemy queen barricaded behind thousands of innocents, and 2 Targaryen riders who might tear each other apart if the realm demands only one. I'd call that a rousing success, wouldn't you?" Jon grimaced. "I'm not here to take her throne." Tyrion shook his head, swirling the wine in his cup. "Perhaps not intentionally, but politics cares little for intention. The moment your parentage becomes widely known, it will erode Daenerys' support. Many lords might see you as a safer bet. A man of the North raised by Ned Stark, one who's shown mercy time and again. And you're a man, besides. Westeros is not famous for embracing female rulers, especially not those with dragonfire in their blood." Jon stared at the surging ocean. "I don't want to overshadow her, Tyrion. She's the one who broke the wheel in the east, who freed slaves and crossed the narrow sea. I only wish to protect my home." Tyrion gave him a keen glance. "I believe you, but the realm will twist that belief to suit its own ends. So be careful if it comes to open talk of your lineage. We walk on glass." Jon nodded slowly, feeling the weight of Tyrion's words. "I'll be cautious, but if we must reveal the truth to rally certain houses, is that not worth it, if it spares innocent lives?" The dwarf sighed, draining the rest of his wine. "Perhaps. We might need it as a bargaining chip against those who fear Daenerys. And if it unites the realm more swiftly, so be it. Just be prepared for the fallout." He set the wineskin aside. "On a lighter note, I suppose we should be grateful that Euron Greyjoy hasn't rained fire down on us from the sea. The storms around Storm's End do half our work for us." Jon rubbed the back of his neck. "We'll set watchers along the coast. If Euron tries to land, we'll be ready." Tyrion stood, wobbling slightly, then steadied himself. "Yes, well, try to get some sleep. We'll need clear minds for the next fiasco." He offered a faint smile that vanished as quickly as it came. "Good night, Jon." Jon watched him depart, the echo of footsteps fading down the corridor. Left alone with the crashing waves, Jon stared out at the moonlit sea, the horizon a pale smudge in the darkness. If he closed his eyes, he could almost feel the swirling presence of Drogon and Viserion on the ramparts, the ghosts of Regal's wings beating in his memory. He thought of the Night King, how final that victory had seemed. Yet here they were again on the brink of another war. The living, it seemed, were their own worst enemy. He pressed his palm to the cold stone, letting the salt spray whip over his face. In a whisper, he spoke to the wind. "Father, Ned, Rhaegar, I don't know who I am meant to be, but I swear I'll protect them all. I swear it." The words faded into the roar of the surf, unheard by any but himself. And so he stood there, a man of 2 bloodlines, looking toward a distant city where the final shape of his destiny waited. Morning broke with steel-colored clouds scudding across a tumultuous sky, threatening a storm. Daenerys ordered the army to prepare for an advance inland, intending to cut off the roads leading north of King's Landing. Tyrion and Varys would pen letters to potential allies, offering promises of fair rule under House Targaryen. Gendry, now installed as a kind of caretaker lord at Storm's End, oversaw local forges and tried to reassure farmers that the new queen's men would protect them from any raids. Scouts set forth to gauge Cersei's troop movements. Rumors swirled that the Golden Company was massing near Rosby, that Euron had doubled patrols in Blackwater Bay. The realm braced for a cataclysm. Jon patrolled on foot, along with Ghost, ensuring the camp's supplies were properly managed. He paused near the stables, where a pair of Dothraki argued heatedly with a northern quartermaster. Language barriers aside, it seemed the Dothraki demanded more barley for their horses and the northerner insisted they were rationed. With Davos's help as a mediator, Jon found a compromise, but he could sense the tension among the men, cultural clashes that might ignite at any spark. As he emerged from the stables, Daenerys approached, wearing dark riding leathers with a heavy cloak pinned by her dragon brooch. Her face was set with quiet determination. "We ride for Rosby," she announced. "Our scouts report that the Golden Company is assembling there, likely preparing to march on Storm's End. If we strike first, we might prevent them from forming a unified front. The main host will follow, but Drogon and Viserion can scout ahead with a small mounted force." Jon studied her, noticing the faint shadows under her eyes. "Are you sure it's wise to divide our forces?" Her expression was resolute. "Rosby is only a few days north of King's Landing. If we can catch them unprepared, we may force them to retreat behind the city walls, preventing them from mustering a larger army." Tyrion agrees. "We can't allow them to gather momentum." Jon nodded, glancing at Ghost, who wagged his tail faintly. "Then let's do it. I'll ride Viserion at your side." Within hours, they formed a rapid response detachment. Grey Worm led several hundred Unsullied, the most mobile among them on horseback, an odd sight that made some Dothraki snicker behind their hands. A handful of northern riders volunteered, along with a small group of Dothraki scouts. Tyrion stayed behind to coordinate with the main army. Varys arranged for a network of couriers to relay messages back to Storm's End. The sky was darkening by the time they set forth, the wind picking up. Jon felt that same coil of readiness in his gut, the old tension that always came before a battle. In truth, he was tired of war. But he recognized that facing the Golden Company outside the walls of King's Landing might spare innocents from being caught in a siege. He tightened the straps of Viserion's saddle, patted the dragon's flank, and took flight alongside Daenerys on Drogon. Below them, the cavalry thundered off in a rolling tide, forging inland under a bleak sky. For 2 days, they traveled east and north, sometimes riding by land through muddy roads, sometimes taking to the skies to scout farmland turned barren by winter. The stormlands gave way to the more temperate crownlands, though the chill lingered in the air. They camped in abandoned fields at night, the flicker of their campfires reflecting in the dragon's eyes. Daenerys spoke of strategy with Grey Worm, determining how best to deploy the Unsullied once they reached Rosby. Jon kept watch with the scouts, seldom sleeping more than a few hours. Now and then he glimpsed Daenerys alone by the fires, her posture rigid as though bracing for the final blow in a long, punishing fight. On the morning of the third day, they spotted Rosby's spire jutting above the low hills. A modest castle with sturdy walls, rumored to have thrown in its lot with the Lannisters. Beyond the walls, they saw a sea of tents and banners. The black and gold sigil of the Golden Company fluttered in the brisk wind. War horses milled inside the encampment, men in polished plate armor or mail, forming neat ranks. Even from a distance, the discipline of professional sellswords was evident. Daenerys and Jon landed on a small bluff, looking down at the army. Grey Worm arrived soon after with a vanguard of Unsullied, halting behind them. Daenerys pulled off her gloves and pointed to the massive troops below. "That's at least a few thousand," she said grimly. "They might have more inside the castle. Word must have reached them that we took Storm's End." Jon squinted at the lines of pavilions. "I see artillery too. Possibly scorpions. They may try to fell a dragon if we're careless." Grey Worm studied the terrain, one hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "We can form a shield wall, attempt to draw them out. The Dothraki can flank." Daenerys pursed her lips. "If we take them by surprise at dawn, we might break their lines with a dragon charge, then let the cavalry smash into their rear." Jon hesitated. Memories of Har Home, the Battle of the Bastards, the long night at Winterfell crowded his mind, battle after battle. He remembered how quickly plans could go awry, how men died for the sake of kings and queens. "Let's be sure we're not walking into a trap. They could be baiting us." Perhaps we should dispatch scouts around the perimeter, confirm they don't have more men hidden. Daenerys nodded. Yes. We'll do this carefully, but I will not let them entrench themselves any further. This has to end swiftly. They set the plan. The Unsullied would approach on foot, shields locked, in the pre-dawn gloom, while the Dothraki swept around from the east. Drogon and Viserion would lead an aerial assault, scorching the outer tents and sowing confusion. Then the cavalry charge would break the Seldswords. If all went well, the Golden Company would surrender or retreat into Rosby's walls, a smaller castle that might be more easily taken than King's Landing. It was a gamble, but Daenerys refused to wait. The night passed with an uneasy hush. Men whispered in the darkness, checking weapons, caressing talismans for luck. Jon tried to rest by a small fire, but his thoughts spun restlessly. He saw the flicker of flames dancing in Daenerys' eyes from across the camp, and he longed to offer her some comfort, but she was deep in consultation with Grey Worm. Instead, he patted Ghost, who lay at his side, and tried to quiet the pounding of his heart. Dawn arrived in a slow bleed of gray light. The ground was cold and damp beneath the soldiers' boots as they assembled. Clouds thickened overhead, threatening rain. Jon mounted Viserion, ensuring the buckles were secure. Daenerys climbed onto Drogon a short distance away. He caught her gaze just once across the lines of unsullied helmets. She offered a small nod, and he returned it. Then the dragons leapt skyward, wingbeats stirring gusts of dirt. The march began. Unsullied advanced, forming a silent wave of spears and shields. The Dothraki, led by a scarred KO, circled the campsite from the east, ready to strike. As the first rays of daylight brushed the horizon, Jon and Daenerys swooped in. Drogon roared, unleashing a torrent of flame that ignited the outer tents. Viserion followed suit, scorching a row of horse lines. Seldswords scattered, some diving behind wooden barricades, others rushing to form ranks. Shouts echoed through the camp. Dragons! Dragons above! The smell of smoke and burning canvas billowed. Yet the Golden Company did not break. Their commanders rallied them into disciplined blocks. Archers raised large crossbows, some with scorpion-like attachments. One bolt hissed past Viserion, narrowly missing Jon's leg. Another struck Drogon's flank with a loud crack, but glanced off a thick scale. Daenerys swerved away, rising higher for safety. Jon looped in a wide arc, scanning for the Seldswords formation. There, amid the confusion, a mounted officer with a golden crest shouted orders, directing a row of scorpion bolts to pivot. Jon felt Viserion's muscles tense beneath him. Another volley soared upward, and he yanked on the harness, urging a sudden dive. The bolts whistled overhead, missing by inches. He flattened himself against Viserion's neck, heart hammering. The Seldswords knew how to fight dragons at least well enough to be dangerous. Below, the Unsullied closed in, shields interlocked. Grey Worm barked commands, and ranks of spears bristled. A wave of arrows fell on them, but the tight shield formation held. Then the front lines collided in a flurry of steel, the Golden Company's pikes clashing with Unsullied spears. The ring of metal on metal cut through the crackle of flames. Bodies fell, blood staining the muddy earth. The Dothraki thundered in from the flank, hooves pounding. Their war cries rose as they slammed into the rear lines, a rock slicing through men who barely had time to turn. Horses screamed, men shouted, tents collapsed. Flames spread, smoke billowing. Jon circled overhead, searching for key targets to strike. Viserion spat fire, raking it across the Seldswords' right flank. A line of men crumpled in the blaze. He spotted Drogon engaged on the far side of the camp, where Daenerys peppered the Golden Company's center with gouts of dragon fire. Bolts zipped around Drogon's massive form, one burying itself in the beast's shoulder. The black dragon roared in pain, wings flaring. Daenerys tilted precariously in the saddle. Jon felt a stab of fear, urging Viserion to race across the battlefield. Drogon managed to keep flying, but blood dripped from the wound. Jon's fists clenched around the harness in anger. A scorpion crew reloaded near the edge of the camp, their weapon aimed at Drogon's exposed side. Jon angled Viserion into a dive, urging every ounce of speed from the dragon's powerful wings. He had no time to question, no time to fear. He let out a cry, and Viserion blasted a column of flame. The scorpion and its crew vanished in an inferno. With splintered, men screamed. Another volley of arrows whirred by, but missed. Jon pulled Viserion up, panting, the stench of burning flesh thick in the air. Through the haze, he glimpsed Daenerys guiding Drogon, pressing the attack despite the beast's bleeding shoulder. On the ground, the Golden Company's lines began to waver under the combined assault of dragonfire, Unsullied discipline, and Dothraki ferocity. More Seldswords broke, fleeing toward the castle gates. A few battered detachments rallied behind their officers, forming a last stand near a line of wagons. The Unsullied advanced, spears dripping red. The Dothraki hooped, circling for another charge. Then, abruptly, a horn sounded from inside Rosby's walls. The portcullis rose, letting in a flood of reinforcements, armored cavalry bearing Lannister banners. Jon cursed under his breath. Reinforcements. The fight was not over. He signaled Daenerys with a wave, urging her to regroup. Drogon soared to him, the black dragon's left wing beating more slowly. Blood pattered on the wind. Daenerys' face was taut with rage and worry. "We have to push them back," she called, voice nearly lost in the roar of battle. Jon nodded, adrenaline jolting him. "I'll take Viserion down to scatter the cavalry. You handle the scorpions." He pointed to another ballista reloading near the castle gate. Daenerys nodded sharply. Drogon pulled away, spitting flame at the scorpion crew. Jon angled Viserion toward the cavalry, now surging out of the gate to flank the Unsullied. The dragon's roar split the air, and Jon could almost sense Viserion's own surge of determination. With a thunderous rush, they dived on the cavalry, unleashing a torrent of fire that scattered horses and men alike. Shrieks and neighs merged in a cacophony of terror. The Lannister banner went up in flames, cinders swirling into the sky. Now the Sellswords truly faltered. Some hurled down weapons, dropping to their knees. Others kept fighting, cornered by the Dothraki or pressed by Unsullied phalanxes. The tide was shifting, though at grim cost. Bodies littered the ground, the stench of char and blood saturating the air. Rosby's gates remained open, but few men dared rush out. The thunder of the surf at Storm's End was replaced here by the moan of the dying. At last, a ragged voice rose from the Golden Company's battered command post. "We yield. We yield." A tall captain with a golden griffin on his breastplate stumbled forward, tossing aside his sword. Around him, men dropped their pikes and bows. Grey Worm advanced cautiously with a detachment of Unsullied, taking them prisoner. The Dothraki roared triumph, brandishing their curved blades. Smoke drifted in ghostly ribbons over the scorched tents. Jon hovered overhead on Viserion, scanning for any final threats. He saw a handful of riders vanish into the woods, fleeing. But the majority of the Golden Company had surrendered or lay dead. Rosby's ramparts bristled with archers who had ceased firing, apparently unwilling to fight without the Sellswords. Daenerys circled with Drogon, the dragon's bleeding wound glistening. As the Sellswords sank to their knees, Jon exhaled, letting tension seep from his shoulders. They had won. He guided Viserion to land near the edge of the camp, kicking up dust and ash. Grey Worm, face grimy with soot, saluted sharply. "Victory, your grace," he said when Daenerys dismounted next to him. She clutched Drogon's harness, inspecting the arrow embedded in the dragon's flank. Blood trickled down black scales. Jon dismounted Viserion in a rush, striding over to them. "Is Drogon badly hurt?" he asked, out of breath. Daenerys pressed her palm to the dragon's trembling side. "He'll survive," she muttered. "But we need to remove the bolts soon." Jon nodded. "We'll fetch the maesters from the rear guard. We owe him that much." Around them, the battlefield rang with the cries of the wounded. Unsullied herded prisoners into a makeshift pen, while Dothraki scouted for plunder. The stench was revolting, but at least the fight was done. Another step forward in this bitter war. Jon looked across the carnage with a heavy heart. More death, more destruction. Would it ever end? As if in answer, Daenerys turned to him, her face streaked with ash, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We've taken the field," she said quietly, "but we must keep moving. King's Landing is only a short distance away." Jon gazed at the fallen, at men who had never wanted to fight for Cersei or for a Targaryen queen, but had done so for gold or survival. "We need to secure Rosby, treat our wounded, bury the dead. Then yes, King's Landing, the final step." Daenerys placed a hand on Drogon's neck, speaking softly in Valyrian to calm him. "We cannot falter now, Jon. One last push, and then we can end this madness." He closed his eyes, remembering the cold hush of the gods' wood at Winterfell, the swirl of snow that had accompanied the Night King's death. That had been an ending, and yet here they were, forging on to another. "Let's hope it truly is the last," he said, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. They stood together amid the ruin of another battlefield, with the two dragons, living engines of fire and fury, as their dreadful companions. Ahead loomed the final confrontation with the Queen upon the Iron Throne, a final reckoning that would shape the fate of Westeros. And though the future was shrouded in smoke and doubt, Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, felt the weight of that destiny pressing closer, as unstoppable as a dragon's roar echoing across the sky.